Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources and really pull out the crucial insights for you. Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating snapshot from early 2017. This was just, 3 weeks after the presidential inauguration. Our sources, they're excerpts from an audio broadcast, and they offer a very specific, let's say highly charged perspective on the political landscape right then.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack the intense claims and counterclaims being presented back then. We're exploring how a particular narrative, about power resistance, internal conflict, how that was being articulated and understood at that specific moment. You'll hear about, well, everything from some pretty dramatic historical analogies to allegations of judicial and bureaucratic revolt, as the source puts it.
Okay, let's get into it. So our source, it paints this picture of a president who, according to this view, was already, and I'm quoting here, devastating the globalists on every front, and also totally responsive to the American people. But, as the source also points out, for every action, there was, an opposite and equal reaction.
Right. And the broadcast, it immediately draws this pretty compelling historical parallel for the president, suggesting he's modeling himself after a figure described as one of America's most interesting.
And that figure is Andrew Jackson. He's presented in the source as a man of extraordinary magic providence and also toughness. It's quite the description. You'll hear some, frankly, hyperbolic language used, like saying he lived things like the Revenant hundreds of times and survived and was completely charmed.
Wow.
Yeah. And it gets specific, too. Surviving more than 15 duels, being stabbed, shot, bleeding for 3 days, and even as an old man, drinking arsenic and lead just to get up in the morning. I mean, it's presented as almost superhuman. Okay. And the source emphasizes Jackson's perceived fight against what it calls an early Federal Reserve, and also his role in supposedly preventing British intelligence from dividing the country, trying to get the South to secede back then. It even mentions Jackson covertly sending the special ops of the day to set up Texas, with a nod to Sam Houston's later warnings about British intelligence before the Civil War. It connects a lot of dots there.
And the connection to the president at the time, early 2017, is highlighted pretty directly. The source notes a bust of Jackson on a horse and a large painting of him right behind the president in the White House. And this whole analogy kind of culminates in this idea that if George Washington was America's first founder and Andrew Jackson the second, then the president, in the source's view, aimed to be the third founder, like a trifecta of power across legislative, executive, and judicial branches.
That's quite a framing, isn't it? Setting him up as this almost foundational figure right at the start.
It absolutely is. It frames him as transformative, maybe even fated, immediately puts everything into this larger historical struggle. It really elevates the conflict, suggesting it's a battle for the very soul of the nation.
Right.
And that sense of fundamental conflict, well, it carries right over into the next big area the source focuses on, the judiciary.
Okay, so here's where, according to our source, it gets really interesting. The core problem identified is the judiciary, and specifically the Ninth Circuit Court.
Yeah, the Ninth Circuit. The source calls it the circus. It covers a huge area of the western U.S., California, other states. And the source claims its reversal rate at the Supreme Court was over 80%, maybe even about 83% at that specific time.
And it gives us a pretty good example of what it sees as controversial rulings, claiming the Ninth Circuit banned wearing American flags in public schools in California because it was ruled an offensive bad symbol, while, according to the source, allowing things like the Mexican flag or motocross symbols or rock and roll stuff. And this is tied into the source describing public schools themselves as mental institutions.
And the central accusation, the real heart of the criticism against the Ninth Circuit in this broadcast, is that its judges are completely and totally out of control. That's the quote. And that they've circumvented Congress and the president on really crucial things like borders and national sovereignty.
So basically ignoring the separation of powers in their view.
Exactly. The source claims these judges have overthrown the long-standing idea that the president executes laws from Congress about the border, effectively declaring themselves commander-in-chief and above the president. That's how the source puts it. And it labels this an attempted overthrow of the Constitution, truly unprecedented action by activist judges who, it adds rather bluntly, look like total Fruit Loops.
Okay, that's strong language. And the source even brings up history to justify criticizing them.
It does. It cites Lincoln's actions during the Civil War, claiming he had judges arrested en masse, to argue that just mildly criticizing them now is totally warranted. Especially when, the source argues, the law about what the president can do with aliens who are from outside the country is absolutely crystal.
Right.
And to back this up, the source states that every other major country has the same type of laws on the books. It lists Mexico, Russia, Japan, Chile, the Dominican Republic, the UK. Even gives an anecdote about a Canadian journalist being denied entry into England to sort of prove the point about sovereign control.
So the Ninth Circuit really becomes this focal point, this symbol of perceived resistance to the administration's agenda.
Absolutely. A key lightning rod in this narrative of federal overreach and ideological capture. It shows a major fault line right at the start of that administration.
Okay, so moving on from the courts. The source then looks inside the government at other agencies. It describes what it calls a globalist rebellion happening there too.
Yeah, and the main focus here shifts to the State Department. The source claims that state doubles refugee inflow since the court ruling, referring back to the judiciary fight. It gives specific numbers. 346 come from Syria, while 232 originate from Iraq, mostly from countries the source labels terror-prone.
And within this supposed rebellion, the source makes a really striking claim about the State Department's actions internationally. It says state was announcing they're going to work to beat Le Pen, who's in the lead, another nationalist candidate in France at the time.
Right. And the source interprets this as, quote, Trump's supposed State Department is working against other Trump-type and Brexit-type candidates. It ties this directly into what it calls a total Soros agenda.
So it's painting this picture of the president being undermined from within his own government.
Completely. The source says he's completely surrounded in all these agencies with sickening traitors. That's the phrase used. And it argues the State Department and the courts are basically acting as God, just ignoring the president. It also claims that major media and tech companies, CNN, MSNBC, Twitter, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, are all celebrating this.
Celebrating it how?
As a time to battle racism, where in the source's very specific view, national sovereignty and the American flag is now racism. It goes on to allege that Clinton cronies at state are the ones doubling the inflow of migrants, and that these same people would promote the Russia hack narrative, even if, the source claims, they privately admit it's not true.
Wow. So this narrative of internal opposition, it really broadens the conflict beyond just the judges, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It suggests this systemic resistance deep inside the government, kind of interwoven with media and tech, all pushing back against the administration's agenda.
Okay.
And that brings us neatly to another huge narrative from that time, the whole idea of Russian interference in the election. Our source has a very, very skeptical take on that.
Right. A highly skeptical and pretty combative take on the Russia interference story.
Yeah. The source flat out claims they never proved Russia hacked anything here. And it argues that, someone appearing on Russian TV to support the president, that gets called influence. But according to the source, other influences are just ignored. Things like Saudi Arabians, communist Chinese, the EU, Hollywood, even the whole power structure, and Katy Perry.
It uses some, let's say, sarcastic examples to make its point about blaming Russia. Things like blaming Russia for corruption in Japan or Mexico,
Well,
or even if your wife catches you cheating, or the New England Patriots winning the Super Bowl, the source jokes, that was down to white supremacy because there were a few white players. It's really dismissive.
very dismissive. And it pushes back against the idea of Russia being this all-powerful entity. The source states half their infrastructure's collapsed, much of Russia is rotting, the population is imploding, and that Putin is just trying to stabilize Russia, not orchestrate global events on this scale.
It also takes aim at U.S. intelligence agencies, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. It alleges the CIA is filled with all these frippish, effeminate, weak little nobodies who just want to get off on the secrecy. Pretty harsh stuff. And it claims that U.S. intelligence itself leaked almost all of the information that was being attributed to Russia.
Now, the source does acknowledge that others were concerned about Russia, right? Like in France.
It does mention that. It notes CNN reporting on French concerns about their upcoming election back then, specifically worrying that Putin's hackers will fish for damaging information using similar tactics to how they targeted Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. And it quotes a French official saying, "One must not be naive about cyber attacks." So it acknowledges the concern existed elsewhere.
But then it pivots back immediately.
Right. The source counters by suggesting the French might want sovereignty anyway. Maybe they don't want to be part of the unelected EU. It basically frames the whole Russian hacking narrative as a distraction from what the source sees as the real problems, like EU and Islamic invasion and a bunch of fifth column collaborators selling out their country where it's so dangerous. It makes this claim that tourism in France was down 80% in 3 years, calling the country a hellhole. Again,
Yeah.
very strong language.
And Le Pen's popularity.
Not because of Russia, according to this source,
Yeah.
but because of her father and supposedly previous elections being stolen.
So ultimately, how does the source tie this Russia narrative together?
It frames it as part of a socialist, globalist agenda, and as a method of achieving communist Chinese-style net censorship to shut down free speech online. And it ends that section by urging listeners to get involved more than ever to fight for internet freedom against this perceived censorship.
So this highly skeptical take on the Russia hack story, it really shows a significant counter-narrative that was forming back in early 2017. For some people, the narrative itself was seen as like a political weapon, not a factual assessment, highlighting that deep distrust of media and intelligence agencies.
Exactly. A profound split in how major events were being interpreted right from the start.
So let's step back. What does this all mean? We've just taken a deep dive into one very specific, highly opinionated view of the political world in early 2017. So it's weeks into that presidency. You've heard about this perceived war being waged against the new administration from inside and out, framed with these intense historical analogies and claims of widespread resistance.
hmm We've explored the claims of a president modeling himself on Andrew Jackson, this formidable historical figure, facing what the source described as unprecedented judicial challenges, especially from the Ninth Circuit, and a State Department supposedly in open revolt. And we also looked at that really critical take on the Russia hack narrative, which the source presented as basically globalist manipulation and censorship.
Yeah, this deep dive, it really reveals how immediately entrenched and complex the political divisions were seen to be right at that moment, and how these narratives of control, of resistance, were being built and communicated through some really specific, powerful claims.
Which, it raises a pretty important question for you, the listener, to consider. In an era like that, with intense political division, tons of information flying around, how do individuals, how do nations navigate all that? How do you distinguish between, say, legitimate challenges or different interpretations and narratives that might be more conspiratorial? And what are the long-term effects on society when you have these deeply held, often really conflicting beliefs coexisting?
We certainly hope this deep dive has given you plenty to think about. What stands out to you away from exploring these specific claims from early 2017?